Wednesday night. It's a cold Wednesday night, right? It's very chilly today. But I'm here. I'm glad to see that quite a few of you are actually on here with me. It looks like there's anywhere between like 15 to 20 of you on here at the moment. Can somebody let me know in the comments? Can you hear me? Okay, if you can hear me just fine, maybe thumbs up or yes or just something to let me know that you can hear me. Right. Perfect. Thank you. So, what I want to do tonight, I'm just going to take a few minutes to kind of go over a few announcements. If you have questions at any point, please go ahead and type them in the chat, and then I will be happy to answer them either verbally or in the chat, whichever one. Thank you, all of you, for letting me know. So, a couple of things I want to remind you about, and then I'm going to cover a couple of things from Chapter 2, just a couple of key areas that maybe are a little bit tricky for people. And again, at any point, if you have questions, feel free to let me know. So I'm on our website, but we are now in week 2, which is wild, hard to believe that we're in week 2. But I sent out an announcement on Monday. So let's just go there for a second. If you look at the week number 2 announcement, a couple of things I want to point out. So for this week, what you're doing is you're reading chapter 2 in the book, and we'll look a little bit at chapter 2 tonight. You're going to read the lecture for chapter 2, the discussion for chapter 2, and I did post all of the grades for chapter 1 and for week number 1, and I have this link right here that I think is really helpful. I posted grades and I gave every single one of you feedback using the rubric tool. So if you're like, where do I find that feedback? Where is my graded feedback? I made a whole little video, and you can see it's a screen capture and then me up here. But I made a video. It's pretty brief, but you can watch it to see where you can find your feedback. That way you can see what your score is, which of course you can look at under grades. But that way you can at least see your score in any comments or things I left you on the rubric. So I just wanted to point that out. I also put in here, there's a little Twitch timing survey. If you have a chance to take that, those of you who are on here are probably the ones who are going to keep coming on here. So I want to make sure that I'm reaching you and doing what I can to best serve you. So if you can click on this, there's 3 little questions that I'd like you to answer. They're mainly, what's the best time to be on here? What is it that you hope I would cover? Any obstacles that you see to Twitch? So it's really brief, should just take you maybe a minute, but if you have a chance, please do take that. So feedback overall last week, really, really good. A lot of you had great kind of stereotypes of psychology, talking about the subfields. A few of you lost points for the nature-nurture distinction. There was a little bit of confusion, I think, for a few people. Some people define nature as like the environment and trees more than genetics and what we're naturally equipped with. But overall, most of you did really well. And again, each week you'll be responsible for the discussions. Remember that, oh, I'm sorry, I clicked on the wrong one here. Remember that there is a little document that I created, discussion rubric and sample posting. And this might be helpful for you if you lost points. You could always come here so you could see what I'm expecting. There's some tips for success and then a sample post. This is actually our prompt for this week about research methods. So you can take a look at this and see what I am expecting from you. But otherwise, most of you did really, really well. And again, what you'll typically see is Mondays, I will grade the discussions for the previous week so that you can have your feedback going into the week that we are currently in. So before I move on from that, again, biggest thing this week, we are now in week number 2. So if you were to click on that, this week you're reading the lecture for chapter 2 and the discussion. So the lecture for this week is all about research methods. So we're talking about psychology being a science. So there's the summary, as always. There's some stuff beyond the book, a little bit about aliens and pseudoscience, correlation and causation. I have a little video here that I made which might be helpful for you. Then there's an in pop culture link, which has some stuff like a couple of books and shows that I think are kind of interesting and related. Of course, there's the key terms for this chapter. These are the things that you'll see on the first exam. And then finally, the last tab is application, right? How can I apply this to my life in some way? So that's what you'll be covering this week. And then for the second discussion, If we go there, for discussion number 2, me again, hello. You're going to be talking about, if you could study anything, what would it be? You're going to describe it, advantages, disadvantages, any concerns. So that's the focus of the entire week, really, on research methods and different ways that we think about psychology as a science. Now, before I keep going, are there any questions, anything at all? I show about 18 of you on here at the moment. Any like general questions or comments before I get into a little bit of topical stuff for the week? I was trying to come up on my webcam, but it doesn't seem to be cooperating at the moment. But as long as you can hear me, then we're in pretty good shape. So any general questions? Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. Any general questions at all before I go into chapter 2? So I sent out. I just got an ad. So we'll usually meet somewhere between like 8 and 9 p.m. I sent out that Twitch survey as a way of seeing when most of you are available. So make sure you fill that out. Again, it's under the announcement link. So let me know when your best time is. Most of the time, people seem to like the evening, but let me know, and I will be happy to adjust. So if the evening works best, we'll do that. And if the mornings are better, we could always do that as well. Right? So what I want to do just for a few minutes here, again, the chapter this week is chapter 2. So if you were taking this class with me in person, then I would be lecturing on these research methods slides. But I do have a couple of slides and a few comments to share with you. And again, if you have questions, you can chime in. For the extra credit, can we choose a topic we haven't looked at yet? Definitely. We've only looked at one topic so far, so it can be anything for the rest of the semester, and you have all the way until the final to turn that in. So yeah, you have lots of time for that. So I want to show you, if you're interested in seeing these slides that I'm going to share with you, if you go to the ebook page and log in, right, and then you have this kind of bizarre screen, but hit the play button and then select your class. Sorry, I was logged in, but it must have booted me out. So if you're on this page, our ebook page, and you click up here on additional resources, I actually have my PowerPoint slides from my in-person class posted on here. So if you're interested in seeing these, you can see them here. If you click on PowerPoints, you can see the slides that I would show you if you were taking this class with me in person. It's just a big PDF, and so these will open. I believe you can download and print them if you would like to, but it'll show you the slides. So here, if you'd like to see what I'm sharing with you tonight, you can find them on here. My computer's running really slow tonight. It's cold, right? It's cold just like me. Getting hit with ads. Sorry, Twitch has ads built into it, and they're supposed to be either gone or less if you have if you are a subscriber. But yeah, there's a bunch of ads. Sorry for that. Can't really do anything about that other than we just kind of have to bear with them a little bit. So again, here are the slides for us. So here's chapter 1, and then if you scroll down, you can go to chapter 2 and 3. So here are the slides that I'm sharing with you if you're interested. And again, these are on our ebook page at the very top under additional resources. So what I want to say about chapter 2, right? So this whole chapter is all about how we think as scientists, right? How we think in a kind of psychological, scientific sort of way. And so most of us, when we're thinking about the world, use things like intuition and common sense, right? We kind of think about what's common to us, what's going on in our own lives. And intuition and common sense are great, but they definitely aren't free of error, right? When we are giving into things like intuition and common sense, we're more in this realm that we can call pseudoscience. Now, anything that's pseudo means that it's not quite whatever word comes next. So pseudoscience means not quite science. It's kind of like science light or fringe science. And so this is a whole body of knowledge or methodology, belief, or practice that claims to be scientific in some way but isn't, right? And so things like astrology, aliens, ghosts, and all sorts of different things fall into this realm, It's super interesting, but it's not necessarily science. So, in contrast to this, psychologists and scientists try and think scientifically, right? They use things like systematic enterprises, right? Like building and organizing knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the world. If we look at a few words that we can kind of compare to science or that go with the word, science is observable, it's objective, it's empirical, it's kind of organized and testable. It's also falsifiable. We create things that we can show to be false. It's replicable, meaning that other people could go out and repeat it. Systematic, it's peer reviewed. Science embraces like a curiosity, skepticism, and humility about the world. Right? So we're curious and we want to know more. We're skeptical, so we question everything. And then we have humility, right? We're willing to admit when we're wrong. And so I love my phone for this, and I'm sure I'm not alone. But so often, right, somebody will mention something, I have no idea what it is. And so I'll go on my phone and I'm curious, right? I type it in, what is blank, right? But I'm also skeptical. Who wrote the article that I'm reading, right? And I'm willing to go back and find out more if they don't answer my question, right? I'm a critical thinker. That's a really big part of this chapter, thinking critically rather than accepting conclusions blindly. Really big part of college, and I think this stage of our education in general. And if we look at that just a little bit more, when we are critical thinkers, we're skeptical, right? We are kind of always looking for any hidden agendas. Does somebody have something to gain from the information that they're sharing? We define terms, right? Really big debate that we have in my class about aliens, right? If we do this in person, how are we defining the term alien? If a product claims to be successful, right, what do we mean by success? How are we going to define that? And you want to be cautious in drawing conclusions from evidence, right? Are there other explanations that might account for the information, right? Like say your best friend is sick and they go out and they buy a product, they use it and they're like, oh, I feel better. You got to get this product. It's amazing. It's going to cure everything, right? Is there something else that could explain why they got better? I'm kind of always looking for those other meanings and other interpretations. Don't oversimplify and don't overgeneralize, kind of walking the fine line in between, and then avoiding making belief changes based on the findings of one study. You can easily find a study to support just about anything, right? If you're trying to prove or trying to show something, you can find a study online for that. And then you can almost always find a study to say the opposite, right? If you go on and search about caffeine, you can read that caffeine has great benefits for things like Alzheimer's, promoting alertness and concentration. And then you can also read how it's awful for you and it can lead to problems with anxiety and all sorts of other stuff. So you always want to look at more than one study before you make up your mind. Right? So I'm about halfway through the things I wanted to cover on here. Any questions or thoughts or comments or anything so far? There's a bunch of you on here with me, but anything at the moment before we keep going? All right. So I'm going to keep going here. Sorry, sometimes the little display capture turns off. It's like it's refreshing. So going back to our slides here, I'll just keep on. When we're embracing science, right, we use the scientific method, right? We're kind of going through this circular process of collecting data, and we have facts and theories and hypotheses. They're all kind of connected to each other. A fact is something that we can all see or observe, right? So if I held up a pen and it fell, right, you would be able to see that. That's a fact, right? And then we can make a theory to explain those facts or those observations. And thankfully, I don't have to do that, right? The theory of relativity and gravity and so on, right? Objects fall at certain rates and for certain reasons, right? There's a theory for that. And then I can make a hypothesis or a specific testable prediction that if I held up a different pen or a different object, it would also fall. So facts lead to theories, which lead to hypotheses, and then psychologists go out and test them through a bunch of different methods to examine if they're true, right, or how valid they might be. And so that's the last part of this chapter, looking at some of those different methods, and there are quite a few different ones that we can use, and sometimes we can combine different methods together. One method that we can do is called naturalistic observation. Right? We can observe people in their natural settings rather than in a lab. Right? So it's kind of like people watching with a purpose. Right? So maybe you're at the mall and you're recording how many times a couple fights, right? Or you're at a playground and you record how many times a child plays with a certain toy or on a certain thing to play on at the playground. You're observing people in their natural setting. Case studies are when you examine, one person or maybe a small group of people in very great detail. You're trying to understand them really, really well. Maybe there's something unique or rare about these individuals or this person, and you're trying to do like an intense description and analysis of that one individual. Probably the most common type of research that you'll ever see or encounter is that of what's called a survey. Right? And I imagine a lot of you have taken a survey. They're very, very common. They can be in the mail, they can be over the phone, they can be obviously be in person. A survey is where we give you some questions and we can draw conclusions from it. Right? Say I wanted to know how many of you that are on here right now, I wanted to know how many units you're taking. Right? I could gather that information from you pretty quickly, and then I could make some conclusions about it. Right? All of the people that I'm studying, we would call a population, right? So let's say I'm interested in all psych students. All psych students would then be my population. Or I could just take a smaller sample, which is a small portion of the population that I'm interested in. So let's say I wanted to know about all Moorpark College students. I wouldn't have to ask everyone, and I might actually not be able to ask everyone. Instead, I can just ask a small sample as long as that sample is random. Right? What I need to make sure I do is get a little bit of everybody. I can't just ask psych students or like night students or part-time students. I'd have to ask a little bit of everyone, maybe every 10th person or something like that, to make sure that I get a good sample. If I get a good random sample, then it'll tell me close enough about the population that my results should be pretty accurate. So survey research is really, really common. The other type of research we see a lot of is something called correlational research, looking at the naturally existing relationship between two or more variables. And a variable is just anything that changes, anything that can vary over time, right? So a variable can literally be anything. And I have this list here, right? It could be extroversion, how many hours you spend studying, your GPA, the number of boyfriends you have. Right? And what we can do in correlational research is take any two variables and talk about how strongly or weakly related to each other they are. And that correlation or that relationship between the two of them, we can give it a numerical indicator. And that indicator is called the Pearson Product Moment Correlation Coefficient, or Pearson's R. And Pearson's R is just a number, right? It's going to be a number between -1 and +1 that's going to tell us how strong two things are when they're connected to each other. Everybody with me so far? Any questions or anything for the moment? I have a couple examples, but just to make sure everyone's still with me. Okay. I just got hit by an ad too, so don't again, I'm sorry for that. There's not much I can do about it, but they are definitely there. So let's look at a couple examples of this, just making sure you're all still with me. If I want to talk about two things that are strongly connected, right? So let's see, can you look at this? Can anyone give me two things, one thing from list 1 and one thing from list 2, that you think would be really strongly connected or like tied to each other? And I'll give you just a moment, but one variable from list 1, one variable from list 2 that would have like a strong relationship. Just see if anyone can come up with it. If not, I have some examples, of course, but if you can think of two things on here, hours spent studying and GPA. Perfect. Oh, two of you had the same thought, right? That's a great example, right? You would hope, you certainly hope, right, that the more studying that you do, that your GPA would be higher, right? That there was a strong relationship between how much you study and your GPA. Another one, right? Your intelligence and your GPA. Those might be connected. Or number of years, 3 years smoking 1 pack a day and lung problems. You would assume, right? Well, I like that. Average daily blood alcohol content and the number of times arrested. For sure, right? You would think intelligence and number of boyfriends. Maybe, right? That one seems like it might be a little less connected, but maybe, you never know. Maybe higher intelligence, higher boyfriends, we could hope. It's hard to say. Uh, but you can look at this and pick any two things, right? You could also pick two things that aren't related to each other, right? So that's a good example right there, right? Intelligence and number of boyfriends is probably something that isn't overly connected. Money earned and number of appliances could be, right? More money, more appliances. Let's say if we want to talk about no relationship, let's say intelligence and number of moldy containers in the fridge, maybe, or intelligence and number of appliances owned, right? We can talk about any two variables, how much you study and how good your exam scores are, how much you come to class and how does that translate to your grade. And when we're doing that, we're just talking about the strength of the connection between two things. They don't always have to be in lists, right? They can just be anything. You can pick any two things and talk about how connected they are to each other. Let me give you an example of that. Sometimes this is totally random and it actually can be misleading. So let's look at this, correlation or causation. Right? So if we look at this chart and we look at this headline and you look at all these data plots, they're very tightly close together. There is a strong relationship between ice cream consumption and drowning deaths. And so what you often see in the media is a headline like this, right? Eating ice cream leads to drowning, right? This is the tricky thing about correlation. Just because there's a relationship between drowning and ice cream doesn't mean that they're connected, doesn't mean that they cause each other, right? This would be me. If I were going down, I'd keep my ice cream up just in case, just so it doesn't get wet, right? But there could be a third variable. In the summertime when it's hot, people eat more ice cream and there's more drowning deaths because people are swimming more. So correlation doesn't always mean that two things cause each other. They might be related, but it doesn't necessarily explain everything, right? Another example of that from The Simpsons, right? Ice cream sales and murder rates go up in the summer. So clearly ice cream sales are increasing murder rates. But again, there's probably something else going on, a third factor or a third variable. Another example, I love this one because it's so random, right? Nicolas Cage, the number of films that Nicolas Cage hasn't appeared in, and the number of people who drown by falling in a pool, right? So if you look at this chart, there's clearly a relationship between the number of films that Nicolas Cage appears in and the number of people who drown by falling in a pool. Nicolas Cage is killing people, right? That's the easy headline to come up with. Of course that's not true. There's something else going on. If you look at this one, right, as global temperatures go up, the number of pirates in the world decreases. So the lack of pirates is clearly causing global warming, right? These are headlines that you often see, right, kind of misinterpreting the information. And I would totally agree with you. Ice cream is a winter season delight. I had some mint chip ice cream just before this, so I agree. But you have to be really careful with correlation. Just because two things are related doesn't mean that they cause each other. So that's kind of like a little phrase to remember. Correlation does not mean causation. They don't always cause each other. There might be a third factor or another variable that's present. There's one more type of research to talk about quickly, and that's the experiment. So if we want to determine cause, we can actually do that with an experiment. An experiment involves deliberately manipulating certain events or circumstances, and then we're going to measure what happens next. So if I manipulate and measure a few things, I can maybe determine cause, right? And in any experiment, there's going to be a couple of groups and variables. The independent variable is always going to be the thing that changes, the thing that you manipulate, or it varies. The dependent variable is the thing that you're going to measure. So you can always ask yourself, what is the effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable, right? And we can look at how these two things might interact with each other. Then you're going to have a group that gets the independent variable, that is like your experimental group, and a group that we use for control. And I always think this would be such a fun thing to test. It'd be wildly illegal and completely immoral and unethical, but that doesn't make it any less fun. Let's say in one of my classes, I wanted to know, does alcohol consumption have an effect on exam scores? Now, I could never test this. I have students who are underage. Alcohol is a dangerous substance, totally unethical. But let's throw that out for just a moment. What if I took one of my intro psych classes and I gave half of them alcohol and the other half non-alcoholic beer? And I said, okay, you have 10 minutes, drink your 2 beers or 2 non-alcoholic beers, depending on which group you're in. Oh, and just for fun, I'm not going to tell the non-alcoholic group that they have non-alcoholic beer, just to see if any of them think they're drunk, right? And then after all of you drink your 2 beers in 10 minutes, I give you exam number 1, and I measure how well you do, right? My guess would be that those who had 2 alcoholic drinks, would do worse. But it's hard to say, right? I'm trying to control all these different variables. And in this example, the independent variable would be alcohol, right? I am manipulating alcohol to measure the effect on exam scores, which would be the dependent variable. There's going to be the experimental group, which is the one that gets the alcohol, and the control group, which would be the one that doesn't, right? And so you can take anything that you want to know, and you can set it up and manipulate it and study it to see if you can answer those questions. Now, there are some limits as far as ethical concerns go, right? We have to make sure that we're treating people with dignity, right? You want to make sure that people know what they're getting themselves into. They have the ability to say no. So it's really important. The APA, the American Psychological Association, laid down some rules, right? You have to make sure that people are volunteering. They give informed consent. They know what they're getting themselves into. They're not exposed to anything harmful or dangerous. I can trick people. I can deceive a participant, right? But I have to tell them afterward, which is called debriefing. I can't violate your right to privacy. Harmful or painful procedures for animals must be thoroughly justified. And prior to doing anything, I have to gain approval. Somebody else will go through it, a review board will look at my experiment and tell me if they think it's okay, right? And again, those are, it's kind of all of chapter 2 that I want to share with you. But those are some of the really kind of key points and key elements. If I go back to our web page here. So make sure, again, for this week, that you are reading through the lecture that I made for you under week number 2. Make sure that you complete the discussion for this week. And again, if you haven't already, I would really recommend that you go back to that week number 2 announcement. So let me go back there for a second. Week number 2, and watch the little video on how to find your feedback, right? Again, I did grade all of the discussions for last week. So if you want to know where you can find that information, watch this little short video, and then of course get going on the stuff for week number 2. I'm almost out of time for the night. Are there any kind of general questions at all that I can answer for any of you? Anything about the class, about the content for this week? Anything at all for now? Normally I try and come on here with video. For some reason my video didn't work tonight, so I'm sorry for that. I set it up on my school computer, and I think they're interfering with each other. But any questions, comments, thoughts, or anything in our last couple of minutes before I sign off? Good. Thank you for the feedback. It definitely takes a little bit of time, so I appreciate all of you being here. I appreciate you participating. Ignore your email about linking. Okay, perfect. I will do so. I'm glad you figured it out. There's not a quiz this week, so if you look at our syllabus, let me show you that real quick before we go. And again, thank you all for being here. I will keep doing it as long as you're all showing up. If you click on the syllabus, there is an exam every 4 weeks, right? So let's go to the end here. Scroll down. My hands are cold. It's chilly tonight. So we are in week number 2 on research methods, and then we will cover week 3. And in week number 4, you'll see there is exam number 1. So when we get a little bit closer to that first test, probably that Monday or Tuesday when I do our Twitch for that week, I will go over some tips for studying and taking the first exam. So comments were helpful in the discussion postings. Good. I'm glad that you were able to get to them. Again, if you ever are confused or need help, make sure you email me. I'm here. I check my email all the time. Thank you again for being on here. Fill out that little Twitch timing survey that I gave to you. Let me know when your best times are that you would like to be on here, and I will do my best to accommodate that. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the night. You are welcome. I'm glad it was helpful. And I'll hang out for just a minute if there are any other questions. Otherwise, I will talk to you all in our Twitch session next week.